One of the quieter effects of narcissistic abuse is that your internal responses can stop feeling fully clear to you. Not necessarily your thoughts, not necessarily your intelligence, but your internal yes and your internal no. Your sense of what feels right, wrong, welcome, uncomfortable, aligned, or off. You may notice yourself hesitating around decisions that once felt simple. You may feel unsure whether something genuinely bothers you or whether you are overreacting. You may even notice moments where your body responds before your mind fully catches up. A feeling of tension, pressure, hesitation, or unease, while another part of you immediately starts explaining that reaction away. For many survivors, this becomes deeply disorienting, because eventually the question is no longer only, what happened in the relationship? The question becomes, why can't I fully hear myself clearly anymore? One of the more destabilizing effects of prolonged perceptual override is that internal signals can stop feeling fully distinguishable from self-doubt. That can create a very particular kind of exhaustion, especially when your system no longer feels fully confident about which internal reactions deserve trust. Most people assume internal clarity disappears all at once, but usually the process is much slower. At first, your internal responses are still there. You notice discomfort, you notice tension, you notice contradiction. But instead of fully settling into those reactions, your attention begins reorganizing around managing the environment. You begin evaluating your reaction before fully allowing yourself to experience it directly. Am I interpreting this correctly? Am I overreacting? Is this actually a problem? Eventually, the evaluation can start arriving faster than the internal recognition itself. Over time, this can create an important internal shift. Your reactions themselves stop feeling sufficient on their own. When internal signals are repeatedly questioned, softened, overridden, or externally reinterpreted, clarity itself can begin feeling unstable. That instability often survives long after the relationship ends. Not because your instincts disappeared, and not because your nervous system stopped perceiving accurately, but because the system adapted around interruption before internal recognition could fully settle into certainty. This is part of why many survivors later describe feeling disconnected from their own preferences, boundaries, reactions, or decisiveness. Not always unable to feel them, but unable to hold them clearly without immediate reinterpretation. You may notice yourself internally saying no, then immediately negotiating against it. You may notice yourself feeling relief around one decision, then quickly questioning whether you are allowed to feel that relief. Or you may notice that your internal yes feels quieter than other people's expectations, needs, emotions, or reactions. Many survivors do not lose their internal signals completely. They lose uninterrupted access to them. That distinction matters. Because when your system gets used to questioning itself automatically, your own internal responses can begin feeling faint, negotiable, or difficult to fully trust in real time. And after enough repetition, survivors often begin assuming the problem is indecisiveness itself. But many times, the deeper issue is that your own internal reactions no longer feel immediately trustworthy to you. Sometimes the system learns to cross-examine its own responses before fully allowing them to exist. That can make even simple decisions feel heavier than they once did. As this becomes clearer, certain experiences can start making more sense. Why your internal reactions may feel delayed. Why clarity can feel stronger in quiet environments and then blur once external input enters the picture. Why your body may recognize something before your mind fully grants it permission to count. Not because your internal guidance disappeared, but because your system adapted around continual self-interruption for long enough that internal signals stopped feeling fully self-authorizing. That adaptation does not reverse through force, and it does not require immediately becoming certain about every reaction, decision, preference, or boundary all at once. If you're noticing how difficult it has become to fully hear your own internal yes and no without immediately second-guessing yourself, I created a 30-day stabilization space as something structured you can step into while you begin relating to your own internal signals more steadily, without needing to force certainty or constantly evaluate yourself in the process. The link is in the description below whenever it feels appropriate to explore. And if you prefer to stay here and continue orienting at your own pace, that is completely valid. Blurred internal signals are often the residue of prolonged self-interruption, not evidence that your inner guidance disappeared. Sometimes the system still perceives clarity while no longer fully trusting itself to let that perception stand uninterrupted. We'll pause here.